Hi there, guys. My name's Austin Haney. I'm an interpreter ranger with the National Park Service. Before that, I actually used to work here at the Lewis and Clark Interpretive Center. I've been a volunteer with Living History as well as ranger here for the last several years before I joined the Park Service. So it's a pleasure to be back, and I'm here to talk to you guys about the fur trade today. So a couple things about the fur trade, something that is really, really important. This is really the world coming to the upper Missouri, both in terms of trade goods and in terms of people. It is a diverse lot. You have people coming from Europe, the Americas, including Mexico, Canada. You have freed slaves. Everybody's coming out here to the upper Missouri to be part of this fur trade. You also have the local indigenous peoples, people from far away, people from close by. This is really the world coming to the upper Missouri. You have people from all over the world, goods from all over the world, and they're being exchanged right out here. Now, the importance of the fur trade with Lewis and Clark is it's kind of part of the whole reason why they're out here. Part of Jefferson's instructions to the Corps included examining the economic potential of the region, and at that time, the biggest potential was the fur trade. It's also a bit of international competition. The British out of Canada are already out in the West, as far as Alberta by this point. So time is of the essence. You gotta really get out here and start this ball rolling. So I'm gonna point out a couple of the items here and just give you a little overview of what we've got here. These are some basic generalities of some of the things you would have seen in the fur trade at the time. So really quick here, this is what it's all about. This is the beaver. The beaver, what do you do with a beaver? Well, you turn it into hats, top hats. They're all the rage at this time. And people are going out, freezing their pants off in this cold weather trying to trap or trade beaver. Now, the trading way is much warmer. You don't get wet. But these guys, how do you make this into a hat? Seems kind of hard just looking at it, right? Well, you take the outer guard hair, then you shave it down, and it's all about that inner layer. It gets turned into felt, the felt gets turned into a hat, the hat goes on somebody's head, and everyone's happy. Well, except for the beaver. So what do you trade to get this beaver? Pretty much anything and everything. I like to say that there are three categories of trade goods. Number one, it's utilitarian and it makes your life easier. Number two, makes you look good. Everyone wants to look good, right? Even today, some people don't change, right? Well, and the third category, fun. And everything on this table can really be classified in terms of utilitarian, vanity, and fun. So, really quick here. Good example of this, a popular trade item, silk handkerchiefs from China. What else comes from China? Tea. I know most people don't imagine this, but a lot of the times people out in the fur trade, be they native or European, American, they like to drink their tea. So don't worry if you ever get stuck in a time traveling loop, all you folks out there with your Earl Grey, you're gonna be just fine. Curtain rings, become bracelets. Just to show you. Another thing from China that makes life easier. What do you think these are? Scissors. Now this design hasn't changed for several hundred years, funny enough. For all you guys with smartphones, I want you to pause your video right now, get on Amazon and look up Chinese scissors. I guarantee you will find a pair of these for less than $5, still today. So, you guys can even own your own little piece of fur trade history if you want it. The humble mirror. And what can you use these for? Well, it's pretty good for looking at yourself. Helps you do your makeup. It's also very good for signaling. So look at that, vanity and utility in one. This is a twofer. As I drop this. This one right here, no purpose at all. This is the fun one. It's a jaw harp. You've probably seen this on TV of your stereotypical hillbillies going around and makes the boing boing sound. Again, it's just for fun. Not everything has to have a purpose. Some of the most important trade items, of course, knives and guns. What can you do with a knife that isn't stone? Well, it's much easier to keep sharp, it lasts a lot longer, and, well, once it's done being useful as a knife, you can use it as a hide scraper. Same thing with a gun. This is a gun barrel turned into a hide scraper. Needless to say, once you've worn out its usefulness, you can turn it into something else. Reduce, reuse, and recycle. It's not a new concept. Harkens back, ironically, to the fur trade and beyond. Now, guns. Guns as a trade item. One of the most important aspects of trading at the time is you're really tapping into an already existing network. The indigenous peoples out here, they'd been trading for, well, about as long as anyone can remember, even past that. And what happens along those trade routes? Well, goods get exchanged. Before Europeans, you're trading shells, you're trading hides, you're trading clothing items and styles, ideas. Nothing's new. And the most important trading frontiers, it's the frontier of the horse and the frontier of the gun. Horse coming up from the south, gun coming from the north. They meet here in Montana right before Lewis and Clark actually get out here. But what can you do with a gun? A lot of things. You can hunt easier. You can defend your homes easier. You can also go out and get new hunting grounds. You can kill your food easier. A lot of good things you can do with a gun, making it probably the most important trade item next to a horse. And guns were traded on the Lewis and Clark expedition. They were traded before it. They were traded after it. A very interesting piece. Harkening back to that tradition of native trade, stone pipes. You find this in Minnesota, this pipe stone. This got traded all over the West. With the introduction of the fur trade, you get clay pipes. It's a little easier. You'd think, oh, why would you want a fragile clay pipe when you can just have this with stone? Well, if you lose this, it's a heck of a lot harder getting this pipe stone from Minnesota if you're somebody out in Idaho than it is to just go down with a beaver plume and trade for a bunch of these little clay pipes. You break one, you lose one, it doesn't matter. It's cheap, it's disposable. But these are nice. Iron arrow tips. This was a very popular trade item, contrary to popular belief. You're not always going to make your own arrowheads. Sometimes it's much easier to just walk into your fur trade Walmart and get a bunch of pre-made tips. Everyone wants their life to be easier, right? That's the whole purpose of the fur trade. Going back to the pipes, tobacco, very important cultural trade item. In fact, this is often what you get trading started with. The tradition is basically, well, if you meet someone new, you want to make new friends, at that time you smoke with them. So tobacco is a very, very important trade item. But this is one that everyone loves to talk about, the beads. These are coming from Europe. Mostly modern Czechoslovakia, Austria, parts of Germany, Italy. And they've found these things all over the place. In fact, there was a recent news article about pre-Columbian glass trade beads up in Alaska. It's amazing what gets traded around the world. The most popular color, as you can probably see by this plate, blue. Why is that? Blue is a very hard color to make naturally. You can get reds pretty easy. You can get greens with a lot of natural dyes. You can't get blue. It's the color of the sky, it's the color of the water. Very important spiritual color, making it extremely valuable. It also happens to be most people's favorite color, so That also has something to do with it, I think. This is a nifty little piece of history here. It's a little calling card, if you will. So these, if you can't really see it, what they've got there is they've got pricing on that side, and they've got size of the bead, what kind of bead they are. So you can go down, and if you're a trader, it makes no sense to come out with all your beads in one place. That's just too much work. Take out some of these cards, point to it, whichever one they want, pick it. Clerk goes back, comes out with your merchandise. The trade is exchanged. Boom, bam, everyone goes home happy. At least you hope. Sometimes it doesn't happen. Lewis and Clark, their experiences with trading really rely on guns, clothing, metals, all the items that you could possibly have wanted in the fur trade. Lots and lots of tobacco. And what they did when they came out here, they made individual little bales, bundles, if you will, almost like presents. In fact, they were called presents. What they do is you'd go to a certain tribe, you'd meet them, you'd open it up, and the gifts were assembled. This wasn't necessarily trading per se, because you weren't really getting anything in exchange other than the hopes of friendship and continued relations. But amongst the most popular or famous items that Lewis and Clark traded are these peace medals. One side, President Jefferson. On the other side, two shaking hands with the little words, peace and friendship. Good message, right? Sometimes things play out a little differently. But one of the funniest things that they used to give out, coats. Lewis and Clark brought along with them several military coats. This is the U.S. artillery captain's uniform of the time period. It was the flashiest uniform in the Army. And, well, if you want to impress somebody, you dress to impress. This goes a long way. Now, I think it's probably a bit of a humorous picture to imagine, you know, these folks out here, you know, just some random Euro-Americans come by and like, oh, hello, you are now under our jurisdiction, have a coat and a medal. Probably thinking like, all right, sounds good. But there are actually some very interesting portraits of natives who had met Lewis and Clark wearing coats like this. So the American West is a much more interesting place than we ever give it credit for. Looks a lot different than what you see in the movies. Now here's an interesting piece. It's called a gorget. It goes around your neck. Very popular trade item from literally the start of the fur trade. Basically, if you want to know what this is, its history goes back to the tradition of medieval knights. This used to be a throat protector from saber slashes. Well, with the advent of the musket, you don't really need knights anymore. Armor doesn't really do you much good. But what this piece kept being was a little symbol of status. This is what the officers used to wear back in the 18th and 17th centuries. And when natives first met, you know, Europeans, most of the time it was military expeditions. You had a lot of important people wearing these. And if the white chief is wearing this, well, if you want to emulate some power and authority yourself, why not get a gorget? Some examples of trade with the natives that did cross over and created new things, because, you know, oftentimes with the fur trade, we talk so much about, you know, the goods, the pretty stuff, the silk and coats and all this stuff that we can relate to as modern people. This is really the advent of modern consumer culture out in the American West. It's a little harder sometimes to see what was given in return from the other side. And oftentimes, that actually comes in the form of relations, family. This is a Métis sash. So the Métis are people who are children of the fur trade, as they're often called. They are the blend of cultures that came together during the fur trade. And this sash kind of symbolizes that group of people out there. So that is one very, very visible and important legacy of the fur trade that, we don't always talk about. So now that we've talked a little bit about some of the items here, the fur trade with Lewis and Clark, and its kind of importance to the West, I think we should kind of delve into the ending of this. So Lewis and Clark, a lot of their men actually came back and worked in the fur trade. That's another important connection with Lewis and Clark. In fact, John Coulter, one of their members, he left early. He was given permission to go out and become a mountain man. And a lot of the guys followed him. Didn't always end so well. Many of them were actually killed out here by different tribes, like the Blackfeet particularly. So not always a happy ending for folks in the fur trade on both sides. So really what happens after Lewis and Clark is they try to get out here, but they're interrupted by the War of 1812. Needless to say, the Americans are kind of put out of commission for about 10 years or so. It's not until the 1820s that really Americans are coming out up to the upper Missouri and engaging in the fur trade like they'd wanted to. That's kind of the golden age of the mountain man, the free trapper and trader. It's at the end of that decade, though, where you get the rise of the fur companies. Groups like the Rocky Mountain Fur Company, the American Fur Company, all of these small little firms of partners coming together that are trying to compete with each other for these resources and trade with the native peoples out here. You've probably heard of the Rendezvous. It's a short, very fascinating period, though. It's when the traders were coming out to the free trappers and the mountain men, and the exchange was happening there. It was kind of a three-parter versus more of a direct approach with actual trading posts. In Montana, kind of the legacy of the fur trade, you really get 1830s, 1840s, places like Fort Benton, Fort Union, out on the North Dakota border. Really what's kind of happening is it's transitioning. The beaver trade is dying out. It's being replaced with the buffalo robe trade. By the 1850s, it's solidly buffalo robes. The 1860s, though, trade is petering out. The American Fur Company goes under. It had long surpassed the Rocky Mountain Fur Company. And in the later 1860s, they finally closed their posts at Fort Benton and Fort Union. Of course, a lot of us in Montana, we know that Fort Benton, well, it got a new life as a steamboat town with the gold rush and with the Whoop Up Trail and other things going on there. The Whoop Up Trail is kind of a interesting segue, sort of a final coda, if you will, to the fur trade. It's the last of the buffalo robe trade. They're going up, but this time, all this stuff that you see here, it's gone. It's whiskey. It's not quite as good of a trade as the early days may have been to some people's opinions. So with that kind of ends the era of the fur trade. Now, we may not always realize it, but in Montana particularly, we are children of the fur trade as well. Some of our towns, they're direct results of fur trading posts. People were coming out here originally for the fur trade. It sort of is the genesis of our modern Western world here in Montana. And that's why I think it's important to delve into this and talk about it and really just explore all of these fun little connections that you can find in just everyday items. And I really encourage that. I think that's something that the fur trade can teach us, that when there's an exchange of people, an exchange of goods, ideas, new things develop. Sometimes good, sometimes bad, but there's always change.